Thanks so much for joining us today for the webinar, where we will be unpicking one of the big topics of the last year, and I'm sure for years to come as well, the EU's Payment Services Regulation, PSR, and the third iteration of the Payment Services Directive, otherwise known as PSD3. Now, one thing I do know from the last few years is that PSD2 has been groundbreaking for payments, yet many in the EU have felt that some provisions didn't go far enough and didn't encourage the competition or harmonisation that was necessary and desired by everybody when that directive was first agreed. As other jurisdictions have also begun to jump ahead on topics like open banking and open finance, and fraudulent payments are also causing endless headlines and headaches for the payment services industry, it is clear now that the EU needs to step up its work on these initiatives, and that's what we will be discussing over the next hour. At Vixio, regulatory intelligence is never strayed far from our day-to-day work, and I've been following both the PSD3 and PSR closely as the European Parliament, which agreed its position earlier this year, and the Council as well have been working out what they want the final text to look like. And I'm sure that once the elections in the EU happen next week, and the Council and the Commission and the Parliament as well are begin to do those negotiations, we will get an idea of how those final texts will look. On this subject, I'd also like to walk you through what we do at Vixio. Vixio is a regulatory technology company, or RegTech, and we like to think of ourselves as a trusted source of independent, authoritative, and actionable regulatory intelligence for compliance, regulatory strategy, and development professionals in highly regulated industries that are going rapid and radical change. We deliver comprehensive, time-sensitive and actionable intelligence on payments and gambling compliance, covering more than 180 jurisdictions across the globe and organised by product or service type. And to tell you who I am, I'm Jimmie, and I work as a senior journalist with Vixio Payments Compliance. My role has included looking at some of those huge regulatory developments, including what we're discussing today, as well as others such as the central bank digital currencies like digital euro and the digital pound, and also JROC in the UK, looking at open banking and AML laws, and also various consumer protection rules across the world. I'd now like to introduce our esteemed speakers today. Stanislav, let's start with you.
Yep. Thank you, Jimmie. My name is Stanislav, and I am a manager at Flagship Advisory Partners. We are a boutique consultancy company focused on on payments area generally, strategy and M&A. And we are working like for fintechs, financial investors, banks, and helping them with the strategy in this payment space. Me personally, I'm in payments for more than 8 years now, and in Flagship like for 3. And before I joined Flagship, I worked as a senior product manager in one of the biggest banks in Czech Republic, in Prague, where I'm based also. And yeah, I was focused there on cards issuing, was implementing also the PSD2 within the bank, and was very close to the overall operations. So yeah, thank you very much for having me today.
Brilliant. And Simone?
Hi, Jimmie. Hi, everyone. My name is Simone Giordano. I'm a partner at the Matteis Law, which is a boutique law firm which is specialized in EU payments regulation. Our main focus is about PSD2 and the upcoming PSR and PSD3, and strong customer authentication, licensing, and also other financial regulation like anti-money laundering, cryptocurrencies. And we are focusing right now on the new regulatory payment package.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, guys. And before we get started on the questions, I wanted to do a little shout out to the audience beforehand, just to send your questions to us during the webinar. We'll try and go through those at the end of the webinar. And I've always found that it makes the webinar much more interactive and engaging if people can send these in. I know that Jack said at the start as well. For now, though, I'd like to explore what the key changes introduced by PSD3 and the new payment services regulation are. So Stanislav, maybe we can start with you on that.
Yeah, of course. So PSD3, well, in general, PSD3 and PSR, they brought like significant or big changes. They are basically like building on top of the changes introduced by PSD2 in general. And I split the key changes into 4 areas. First area is the changes around licensing and supervision. Second area is around the payment system access. Third area is around the transactions or the clarification there, like the exemptions. And fourth area is risk management and customer protection. So basically, like, this area focuses more on fraud. So if I will start with the licensing and supervision area, the biggest change I see there is the merging PI and EMI license, right? So what this is exactly what PSD3 brings, that well, from now on there will be only PI license. The EMI license will basically disappear, and it links to the reauthorization process, which is basically like required by PSD3, and it's gonna be like a big burden, like for compliance departments, for legal departments, and for every like financial institutions, because what PSD3 says is that well, within 24 months after PSD3 will come into force, all PI and EMI license companies will need to basically reauthorize, go through this reauthorization process, which will basically like include, give like all the documentation, go through this process, and also add additional documentation, such as like winding up plans or operational structures. So there are also like introduced also new types of documentations. So this is, I think, like the biggest change within this area. Another change within this area is that well, all PI companies will be able or will be allowed to open an account at central banks. This, I think, it's also interesting one, because well, it's currently like all PI companies, they will need to find, they have to find someone who will basically like open the account on behalf of them, but now they will have a direct access there. It's a good thing for them, because they will be able to cut off the middleman, so they will be like more cost efficient, more efficient like from the cost perspective. But also it's a good for customers, because well, they will be like better protected in case of bankruptcy. So these are the main changes from this licensing and supervision area. Another one is the payment system access. So all PI companies, they will have access to all payment systems within the EU. It won't be as easy as it sounds. They will need to go through the process again, like file the documentation. The process is not exactly known yet, or at least not to me, but I'm expecting that well, in general, it will bring like more competition. It will be easier to enter the markets in case of like expansion, and from companies like outside of Europe, but will also for companies like within the European space. It also like I expect that it will bring like smoother process, better like it will be easier like from the technology standpoint, because the connection will be finally like directly between the company, and there will be again like no middleman, and it will also bring the cost reduction on this side. And another area which is like very important is open banking. Open banking is like, it's like one of the key it was one of the key requirements from PSD2 perspective, and now the PSR basically like building on top of it, because the problem was that well, the technological standards across Europe, it wasn't like unified across every country. There were like slight nuances in the requirements from the technological perspective, but was also from like the legal requirements, how to connect to these open APIs, and this is exactly what PSR brings: the unification across all markets. Another thing like from this open banking is that well, the banks, or basically the account providers, they will not need to maintain like 2 environments, one for fallback and one for like live environment, but only one environment, which is also good things for them from the development perspective. But on the other hand, they will need to create so-called customer portal. The customer portal, it basically means that me as a cardholder, when I will go to my internet banking or smart banking app, there will be the portal, and I will be able to see who has an access, like from the third-party providers to my account, like through this open API, and I will be able to see it and decline it. So it's basically be the overview of third-party providers who has access to my account through this open API, which is again like a good thing from customer standpoint. But this is something what banks and account providers need to count with, like in terms of development. It won't be as easy and straightforward. Third area, and here I will be generally brief, is the transactions. So here it's like the more the clarifications about exemptions, especially Moto and MIT clarifications, because in PSD2 world, well, it wasn't like super clear this Moto where to use MIT and Moto transactions, so there will some kind of like an overlaps. So here's the like basically in PSR about the clarification is better formulated, so it's easier. Surcharge fees, the changes around surcharge fees, currently it was used only for cards, but PSR basically brings it, well, it expands to other payment types, such as like direct debits, bank transfers, and also it's going to be applied like to all currencies, not only euro. So basically, for example, here in Czech Republic, where you have like Czech koruna, so it will apply also to this. And last part from this transaction area is the make cash more accessible. So basically like changes around cashback. So whenever I will go to merchant, I want to do a cashback, I need to make a purchase before the cashback, right? But well, with the PSR, basically the change is that, well, I can do the cashback even without the purchase before up to 50 euro. And it's a good thing, like especially in smaller villages where the ATM network coverage is basically not as broad. And the last area is risk management and customer protection, and this is generally like around the fraud. And I think it's like, at least from my point of view, it's I like the most interesting part, because what PSR stated, well, we need to fight with fraud, and to do that, we introduce the transaction risk analysis, but well, you are not using it as we expected. So now you're required to use it more, this transaction risk analysis, basically. So, and I think it's a good thing, because the general UX from the like cardholder perspective, especially for e-commerce transactions, it's not very smooth, right? Like you need to add your card details, then go through the checkout page, 3D secure verification, SMS one-time password, or the biometric verification. So in general, it's not very smooth, and the approval rate or abandoned rate, it's basically like higher. So this is like a great opportunity. This transaction risk analysis is a great opportunity how to use it, how to improve this user experience. And another part like around this fraud management, what basically PSR says that, well, you need to apply the multi-layer authentication and more fraud tools. So not only the transaction screening, but combine it. Well, do it in several layers. So use device fingerprinting, for example, when your customer will be basically like log in to internet banking or smart banking, like use device fingerprinting, IP analysis, behavior scoring, you know. So this is what they are really pushing, because fraudsters, they are like innovating. So generally, from my perspective, this is like a very good approach. And so so that was basically everything from my side, like around these key changes.
Yeah, I think with it's interesting with fraud, because I think certainly it's a real push in all over Europe. It's definitely a push in the UK as well that we're seeing at the moment to try and improve the fraud situation. And with the instant payments regulation coming in, I think there's definitely an expectation across the EU from people I've spoken to that fraud is about to jump up. Simone, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on to that, or if it'd also be good if you could go through the difference or the necessity for there to be a directive this time and also a regulation for payment services.
Yes, thank you, Jimmie. This is a very good question, because as we know, the PSD2 will be updated and replaced by two different pieces of legislation. On the one hand, we will have the so-called payment service regulation, which as a regulation will be directly applicable in member states without the need for national transposition. It will become applicable 18 months after its entry into force, which basically means publication in the official journal. And most of the provision of the PSD2, of the current PSD2, will flow into this regulation. And I'm talking about all the requirements on transparency, on execution time, on open banking, on strong customer authentication, and on customer protection and liability for fraud. So we can say that the bulk of the PSD2 will flow into our regulation. And on the other end, we will have the PSD3, which will be substantially emptied because it will only contain the requirement for licensing of payment institution and for their supervision. So the choice of the Commission was to have a regulation to have more harmonization, a full harmonization of requirements across Europe. That was a key objective of the Commission. And the idea is to avoid regulatory arbitrage across Europe, because what the Commission has seen after it has conducted its study on the application, on the impact of the PSD2, which was published last year in February 2023, if I'm not wrong, is that there were a lot of provision in the PSD2 that were implemented differently in member states. And one example is surcharging. Surcharging is the extra cost that merchant can apply for accepting a given payment instrument. And the PSD2 leave some discretion to member state on how to apply this, on how to apply surcharging. And half of member states have basically allowed surcharging for certain payment instruments, like, for example, corporate payment cards, which are payment cards that are issued to corporate customers, while the other half of member states completely banned surcharging. So there was a need to avoid this regulatory arbitrage. And the need for this uniformity is not only evidenced by the fact that the Commission proposed a regulation, but also on the number of level 2 texts that are contained in this regulation and in the PSD3, because you know that PSR and PSD3 will be the level 1 text, but the EBA will have to develop what is so-called regulatory technical standards, which is level 2 text, which will be formally adopted by the Commission as a delegated regulation, so also in this case directly applicable in member states. And just to give you an idea, under the PSD2, the EBA was mandated to develop 7 sets of RTS. Under the PSR and PSD3, the EBA is required to develop 16 sets of RTS, and this shows that there is a need for full harmonization, swifter enforcement, and to avoid the regulatory arbitrage across Europe.
Yeah, and with the EBA's RTSs that it will have to create, what has been your past experience with this? How long does it take them, and what's that process like for payments and e-money firms to deal with?
Yeah, the process to issue RTS can vary. In general, the EBA is required to develop its RTS within 12 months from the entry into force of the PSR and the PSD3. This is the timeline for almost all the sets of RTS, with the exception of a couple of sets of RTS which have a longer period of 18 months, but in general 12 months. And the idea is that the EBA develop its draft RTS, and then it shares with the Commission, which can propose amendments. And this process can last several months. So the idea is probably we will have the RTS not before 1 year, 1 year and a half after the adoption of the PSR and the PSD3. It can take some time. The good thing for the industry, the good news is that every time the EBA develops its RTS, generally launch public consultation to allow the industry to give their feedback. And this feedback is very valued by the EBA because after all, it's in cooperation between the EBA and the industry is very important.
Of course, absolutely. And in terms of what firms should be doing at the moment to prepare for the PSD3 and PSR, if they need to be doing anything at all, what would your guys' recommendations be? Stanislav, maybe we can start with you.
Well, yeah, well, definitely. The firms, like, they can start even now, even if it is not finalized. Yeah, I'm not expecting like any significant changes or like big impacts. So they can start even now. And the first step, and what we are generally like advising, is to summarize like the preliminary findings. So the PSD3. So literally like create a table, go through, and basically like take like what applies to me if I'm issuer, acquirer, or merchant, or whoever. What out of these like apply to me. Then basically like the second step is go through like through the operational changes and compare like with which like you are compliant with and which you are not compliant. Basically like do the review of your current processes. So from the operational standpoint, but well also from the like the fraud perspective, right? Because well this PSD3 and the PSR will basically push forward like the general like fraud tools usage. So this is something what well should be also part of this operational changes in this review process. And then out of it, like set like the strategic and commercial impacts, like what needs to be changed, set like the KPIs where you want to be. So if I will get back like to fraud, for example, so do I want to be like the baseline of and meet the requirements from the like the legal requirements, or do I want to be like highly effective in this and build on top something? So do I want to be like best in class here, or so basically like set the KPIs and set the expectations. And yeah, and basically like some bar for you, and also like from the fraud perspective, but also from the technological perspective. For example, like this open API, do I want to leverage it for additional products? For example, do I want to go live with an app? Do I want to connect with other banks? So these are all the questions. Well, you need to answer, and then basically like the fourth step is to allocate the capacity for compliance and development. So even now we know that well there will be like impacts on every financial institution, every issuer, every acquirer from the compliance point of view because of this whole reauthorization process. So because well they will need to go through the reauthorization process, but also create like additional documentation. So and it won't be easy. Like it won't be easy. So this is something what you know right now. So allocate the capacity for compliance and legal department, and also for the development department, because we know that well you will need to create like additional stuff around open API, open banking, this customer portal, for example. But there are also another like requirements what you need to build. So for example, in the statements you need to when you will be issuing the statements to your client, you will need to basically link every transaction to the merchant. So this is also like additional step like required like in development. So so there are things well we know even now that well the banks will need to go through. So from this perspective, like to allocate the development capacity, this is the fourth step from my perspective.
And is it coming up with your clients yet? Are you having any clients ask about preparing for PSD3 and PSR yet?
Yes, well, we are getting these questions. The questions are not in general like super specific. That well are around like how you understand this, how you understand, for example, like this reauthorization process. Yeah. So these are the questions like we are understanding well, but we are getting, and so we are like we are explaining them that well this reauthorization process we don't have any like detail because it wasn't finalized yet. We are waiting also for this regulatory technical standards regarding this open API and all these other areas. But the general questions are what is included in the PSD3, what's going to be the impact, and how we should like in general prepare. So this is like literally what we are telling them, and we did it like for several clients already. So like this process, literally setting up the strategic and commercial impacts, their goals. So this is exactly like what we do, and these are the general questions we are getting.
Interesting, nice. And Simone, I wonder if there's anything that you think that firms need to be preparing for at the moment.
Yes, we also receive a lot of questions about the interpretation of the requirements in the PSR and the PSD3, which sometimes these are difficult questions because these are moving targets. The texts are still under discussion. we have a good basis, which is the initial proposal of the Commission presented last year. But you know that co-legislator, the Parliament and the Council are still discussing on several aspects, and I've seen that there is a big interest by payment firms on the issues of security, strong customer authentication, and customer protection, liability for fraud. I think these two sectors are of particular interest for the impact that they can have on payment service provider and in general on payment firms. Just to give you a couple of examples of hot topics at the moment. One is about the use of behavioral and environmental characteristics for authentication. This was a very much debated topic because it's one of the key changes introduced by the PSR. What are behavioral and environmental characteristics? It's a combination of data points related to a transaction, which includes payer's location, payee's location, transaction history, spending pattern, shipping address, and so on, which taken together can constitute what we could call like a transaction fingerprint, something very unique for the transaction and for the payer. And what the European Commission proposed is to include this data, this behavioral and environmental data, in the PSP's transaction monitoring mechanism, which are the transaction monitoring that each and every payment service provider must carry out for each and every transaction. But on this, for example, there is a slight difference between the European Commission text and the Parliament text that was approved last month in April, because the Parliament goes one step further and says, okay, this behavioral and environmental data can also be used to authenticate the user as an authentication factor of inherence, something the user is. The idea behind this proposal amendments by the European Parliament is that if you are buying the same product from the same website, from the same merchant, and you ask it to be shipped to the same postal address, and the billing address is also the same, and other factors are the same, then the bank, your bank, can be pretty sure it's you, it's actually you, the legitimate payer. And this is a very important move for the industry because allowing this data as an inherent authentication factor would basically open the door to a number of new authentication solutions that are, on the one hand, more secure, because this combination of factors is very difficult for a fraudster to steal, because it's unique, it's like a fingerprint, it's quite unique. And it's more secure than static password, for example. And on the other hand, they are significantly more convenient for consumer. They are frictionless and seamless. They offer an unmatchable payment experience and can be adapted to new payment models, like, for example, Internet of Things, like smart cars or smart fridge. So this is an example of a key change on which payment service providers and payment firms are very eager to know about. And just to give you another very short example is about liability. You know that one of the key objectives of the Commission was to tackle, with the PSR, was to tackle new type of frauds, in particular impersonation fraud, also called spoofing frauds, which are frauds whereby a fraudster convinces you to make a payment that you would never made in normal circumstance.
Yeah.
And so far under the PSD2, the payer is always liable for this kind of fraud, but the Commission proposed that the payer's PSP, the payment service provider, is liable unless there is gross negligence by the user. And this is also a very big move because it basically shifts liability to the payment service provider, and this would require a significant allocation of financial resources to prepare to bear this liability.
Yeah, I think I do have some follow-up questions, but I hope you don't mind. But with strong customer authentication, I mean, I remember when I just started working at Vixio and everyone was getting ready to implement that in late 2020. with the changes that are being suggested, would you say that it's going to be as big a deal for payments firms and others in the ecosystem being able to prepare for these changes as it was when SCA was first put into place?
Let's say that there are big opportunities for payment firms to deploy new and innovative authentication solution, and of course there will be more requirements on SCA. I cannot hide it because, but this is very evident from the number of provision of the PSR that are dedicated to SCA. We have now 7 articles in the PSR versus only 2 articles in the PSD2, and we have 5 sets of RTS on SCA under the PSR versus 1 set under the PSD2. So, of course, there will be more requirements, but the good thing is that the industry is already well prepared because the SCA infrastructure has been deployed in the industry, and this is a good starting point. Of course, in my view, what is important is that the industry, the payment firms, continue to cooperate with the regulators and policymakers, and especially their central banks, to find a good balance between security and convenience, because this is ultimately what counts to increase approval rates and to continue to create a very solid European payment ecosystem.
Yeah, and on the liability side, and I don't know if Stanislav, you also want to come in on this, because you mentioned fraud earlier. Is there anything that payments firms can do at the moment to prepare for this, I guess, these liability rules changing? Because I mean, in the UK as well, we have the authorized push payment rules coming in October this year, and certainly I know that people, when I've told people in Brussels about those, they've seemed quite alarmed because of the level of reimbursements that payments firms are going to have to prepare to make. So yeah, it'd be interesting to know whether there's anything that payments firms or PSPs in general can do to prepare for, I guess, having a lot more responsibility and liability when it comes to fraud.
I think, well, today, like, around the liability for fraud in general, it's about like the data we are using, the tools you are using, and also like your strategy for fraud. Because, well, back maybe like to the strong customer authentication, it's also one part of the PSR that, well, the like payment firms, they will need to basically, they can now combine like 2 same factors. So they can combine like knowledge, which wasn't there before, right? Well, they need to combine 2 different factors, but, well, basically like not to discriminate like elderly or not as digital like savvy people, they can combine like 2 same factors. So it's another thing. But, well, in general, like for this liability, I think that, well, it's all about the fraud strategy and fraud tools you are using today and data you are leveraging. Because, well, today what we also heard like from our client, and if you are on the merchant or acquirer side, well, you have like plenty of data you can evaluate, right? Because, well, you are getting like from the transaction, from this checkout page, you are getting lots of data. But, well, on the issuer side, you are not getting as much of the data, because, well, merchant, they usually do not pass as much data to your side. So you can use either like third-party data, sort of like the consortiums, which is, I think, well, also like also part of the PSR that, well, they are motivating like issuers and acquirers to establish like consortiums, and, well, using the consortiums to share the third party, well, use the risk scores or some fraudsters like database to use it. So I generally think that, well, for issuers especially, it's about like how smart like they use the data, authenticate, and make this overall make this like basically like the approval rate, but, well, the user experience for customers like smoother. So basically like not to overrule usually, for example, like the exemption applied like from the acquirers, because, well, this is something what also we see like quite often, that, well, that issuers that they don't have like in place this type of stuff. So so they usually like overrule this exemption. So this is like usually what we are not recommending. But well, generally for this fraud, what we are recommending is like do the review of those processes, set up the rules what you have today, and use basically more, and don't be afraid to use this like this transaction risk analysis and all these additional multi-layer tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to the PSD3 and PSR, do you guys think that it will make life easier for payments and money firms, or are things about to get trickier? Because I mean, when Eric de Colombier was originally promoting this last year, I remember the term I constantly heard was evolution, not a revolution. So yeah, it'd be interesting to get your guys' response to that.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I recall that the PSR and the PSD3 was presented as an evolution rather than a revolution. But as we have seen from the excellent and complete overview that Stan provided before, there are many changes, so okay, maybe it's not a revolution, but it's a very big evolution. So I would say whether it makes life easier for payment institution and money institution, it will ultimately depend on the final text, of course, and on the also in this case on the cooperation that payment service provider will have the opportunity to provide to regulators, in particular to the EBA in the context of the consultation for the level 2 text, because don't forget that of course the level 1 text set out the general regulatory framework, but many aspects will be actually regulated through the level 2 text. We have seen something similar, for example, with the DORA regulation, which is a different piece of legislation about cybersecurity, and whereby many technical aspects are regulated through this level 2 regulation. So it's probably a bit too early to say whether the new rules will facilitate the life of PSP. Of course, this will depend. This will depend on what the final text will be.
Yeah, no, I do agree. When Stanislav was going through the different changes involved at the start, I was thinking there is a lot more than I was originally anticipating was actually going to change with the PSD3 and PSR. So yeah, I think it's going to definitely be one to watch. And also when firms are having to prepare to implement things like DORA, which is, you know, certainly the countdown is on for that this year. And I think kind of moving on to some of the other regulations that are coming up, and there are plenty. How do these regulations, the PSD3 and PSR, that is, link with the digital euro, instant payments, the open finance framework as well? What do you think it is that the EU is trying to do here? Simone, I don't know if you want to take that.
Yeah, this is a very good question, because we always have to take a holistic view to the new payments regulation. It's not just a case that the Commission proposed the PSD3 and PSR the same day it proposed also the digital euro regulation, the regulation on cash as legal tender, and the proposal for a financial data access act, which is FIDA, also called FIDA. And let's start with the instant payment regulation. Instant payment regulation has already seen the light in March. Basically, this is a regulation that aims at making instant payments, instant credit transfer mainly, as the new normal in Europe. And of course, there is a big interplay between these two regulations. First of all, because instant credit transfer are payment service. And then they are subject to all the rules under the PSD2 now, and in the future under the PSR, for example, on transparency, on open banking, strong customer authentication, customer protection, and so on. So there is a clear interplay between these two legislative acts. There is also a nice procedural interplay between the two acts, between the PSD3 and the instant payment regulation, because as you may recall, when the Commission proposed the PSD3 in June, last June, it inserted a new provision allowing a payment institution to directly access to designated payment system, which means the biggest payment system in Europe, which are designated under the Settlement Finality Directive. And at some point around December, this provision of the PSD3 was moved from the PSD3 into the instant payment regulation, and this was basically done to fast track its adoption, because at the time the instant payment regulation was at this final stage, and so there is a clear connection. On Digital Euro, of course, it's also we can apply the same reasoning here, because Digital Euro transaction. Just to give you a little context about Digital Euro regulation is an initiative proposal of the Commission, which provides the regulatory framework to the ECB, to the industry, and to the ECB for the issuance of Digital Euro, because Digital Euro is a ECB initiative, but the idea is that the ECB will provide the technical infrastructure for the issuance of Digital Euro, while the European Commission will provide the legal framework. And also in this case, Digital Euro transaction will be payment transaction under the PSD2 and the PSR, so they will be subject to all the requirements set out therein. And FIDA is another piece of legislation that was presented in June, and it's about open finance. FIDA regulation is about what it's commonly called open finance. And what is open finance? We can define open finance as open banking beyond banking. Basically, it's access to customer financial data beyond the banking sector. So, for example, for insurance, for pensions, for investment. So it's enhanced open banking, we could call it like this. And what is important with the FIDA, I think that we are still in the early days, of course, of FIDA and open finance, is that the rules on open banking and the experience that the industry gained with open banking in the last 10 years is capitalized and can serve as a blueprint to build the regulatory framework on open finance. And this is very important. It is important that there is a consistent legal framework between open banking and open finance. And this is also important to allow open banking firms engaged in open banking to extend their activities and leverage new business opportunities to extend their activities in open finance sector.
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly there seems to be, I mean, FIDA it seems to be the most or the biggest step change, I guess, and it will be interesting to see how quickly the institutions are able to agree on a final text of that. I was wondering as well, I could see you nodding your head throughout, Stanislav, and I'll come to both of you on this, but what would you say at the moment is coming up with your clients the most out of all of the, I guess this conveyor belt of regulation that that fintechs and others are going to have to comply with over the next few years, whether that's PSD3, PSR, instant payments, or FIDA, or the digital euro with that as well?
Well, I think that definitely like the PSD3 and PSR are the most like critical regulations for our clients, and this is like what we hear. Yeah, this is like literally what we hear, because this PSD3 and PSR is mostly like around payments. It's like this strong customer thing, and basically like around these processes within the card. So mostly this PSD3 and PSR around our clients, 100%. And maybe I will quickly respond to your previous question about if the PSD3 and PSR make life easier for these money firms. Yeah, but it's going to be like brief, but well, I think that well, in short-term perspective, like not really, because well, they will need to go through the discovery phase. They will need to set this like strategy goals. They will need to start like development or develop all the all the open banking, and well, this is like everything what we have discussed, go through this reauthorization process. But as we hear it even from our clients, and as we also think like from the long-term perspective, it will, because this unification across all the countries, which PSR will hopefully bring, it's like the basically like it, especially for geographic expansion, the overall management will be easier. So, and we think that well, it also brings like more companies into Europe, like especially like from like US, Asia, because well, this overall like requirements and this legal frameworks, and given the fact that there are nuances between the countries, it's not as easy like for these companies to enter. So this overall unification, I think that well, it will make the life definitely like easier for companies from this perspective.
Interesting, nice. And I guess we are into the final 10 minutes of a webinar. We do have some questions that have come through, and if anyone wants to send through some more, that's absolutely fine. Just send them through sooner rather than later. One of the questions we had is, we're in 2024 and an financial institution or payment service provider is still unable to provide for merchant that might be a subject person under the AML law the cardholder's name. Any developments on that? Simone, I don't know if you'll be able to help with that.
Yeah, this is exactly the point on we were talking about before. It's that's an important point, because we talk about the transaction risk monitoring and all the data that should be analyzed for each and every transaction to evaluate the risk of a transaction. This is part of the SCA framework, and one of the key elements of this transaction monitoring is that not only payment service providers are able to verify this data, including, for example, cardholder name, as what asked in this question, but that there is an infrastructure that allows this information to flow from between the various payment actors, between the merchant, between the bank of the merchant, and the bank of the cardholder, for example, in the payment cards, the issuer. And this is very important, because we see a big difference here, for example, in the world of cards and the world of bank transfer, because, for example, with cards, a technical infrastructure has been built to help the sharing of this information. It is the MV3DS secure 3DS infrastructure, which allows a lot of data points to flow from the merchant to the acquirer, which is the merchant bank, and to the issuer. And this will, of course, facilitate a lot transaction monitoring in the future. And a similar infrastructure, at least in my knowledge, is not yet present in the credit transfer environment, and it will be interesting to see how whether it will be built in the future. But of course, it is very important that all the payment actors can share information to increase security of the payments.
Brilliant. And we have had another question come through. This one is on the commercial agent exemption, which is something that I've written about a bit during my time at Vixio. And it would be great to know if either of you are able to take this on. In your opinion, is there a significant difference between PSD2 and PSD3 scope of the commercial agent exemption? Any takers?
Well, yeah, well, my answer will be brief and not as smart, but well, what I heard is that, well, it's going to be like stricter, that, well, the agent exemptions, that, well, it will be it won't be the same as this PSD2, but, well, as far as I heard, well, it's not finalized yet, like the structure and the final meaning, or do you know, Simone? Because, well, I heard that well, it's not finalized, and it's not it's not finalized.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, with the commercial agent exception, I would say that it does seem to be be getting stricter as time goes on. If you look at the difference between the PSD1, PSD2, and now the PSD3, it is definitely going to become increasingly stricter. I think it seems to be to take on online marketplaces is their reasoning. Simone, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add on to that.
Yes, as you said, the big difference was between PSD1 and PSD2, and with PSD3 basically reproduced the PSD2 exemption with some tweaks which are still under discussion. So it's a little bit too early, but it's not a major shift between the PSD2 and the PSD3 on this exemption anyway.
Okay, thanks very much. So yeah, we've come to the end of the webinar, and I guess a thing that would be good to sign off with from both of you just quickly, what would you say is the biggest or most important point in the PSD3 or PSR that people need to be paying attention to?
Well, well, yeah, I can go first. So in general, like is this whole like the process, and from my point of view, it's like the planning of the steps, like how to implement the PSD3. Because well, I remember when we are implementing the PSD2 into PSD2 like 3 or 4 years back, the planning, well, everything was like super unclear, and the planning as well, we did everything in the last moment, you know. So if I would be in the same position and I would be implementing like the PSD3, I would plan like more carefully, allocate the resources. I would be like very careful on this authorization process, and even like get these whole informations in advance and start like working on these additional documents as earlier as possible. And another part is the open banking and this customer portal, because if you will be able, like as an account provider, if you will be able to build it like properly, you can like sell it to your customers, you know, like, because this is something what I think that well customers will like, that they have the overview as an access, and if you will be able to market it like properly, it can be like your big benefit. And the third area is the fraud management overlay, like this transaction risk analysis and this multi-layer authentication. Because from my perspective, it's like, yes, it's a legal requirement, but well, it's also an opportunity how to improve the general like the UX, because I think that well, today they say the cardholder flow, like the UX for e-commerce transaction, is not as smooth, and we see that well, these account-to-account payments, for example, it's growing. The cards as well, but not as quick as these account-to-accounts, because the process is smoother. So this basically like brings the opportunity to build on it and to work on it. So I would definitely like focus on it and focus on this fraud strategy, and try to build not only like to fulfill the legal requirements, but also go like one step ahead.
Brilliant. And is there anything from you?
I think that the most important point for payment service provider and in general for payment firm to prepare for the PSR and PSD3 is an advice I would give to all firms in the payment sector, in the payment ecosystem, is to design their solution now in a way that it's future-proof, that can accommodate adjustment to make sure that, for example, on authentication, but also on any other field, that can be accommodate the new requirements that will be brought by the PSR and PSD3, because one could think that the new requirements will be live only in 2 or 3 years, and so they are not right behind the corner, but that's not true, because it's important to prepare, because what we have seen in the past, it was the industry made a lot of efforts and invested a lot of resources to adapt to the PSD2 rules, especially on SCA. And in that occasion, the European Banking Authority and the European Commission granted an extension period to give extra time to the industry to comply. It is very unlikely that this will happen again. So it's very important to be prepared and to start designing all payment solution right now in a way that is really future-proof.
Fantastic, brilliant. Thanks very much for that. So I'd like to say thank you to our speakers today. It's been a pleasure to speak to you both about this issue. I think it's and it's definitely going to be something that I'm going to be watching very closely over the next few years. And before I hand over back to Jack, I will just point out I am at Money 2020 in Amsterdam next week, and then in 2 weeks I'm going to be at EBA Day in Lisbon. So hopefully, if any of you in the audience are there, just give me a message. It would be great to catch up. And if I could now pass back to Jack, that would be great.
Thank you, Jimmie, and big thank you to Simon and Stanislav. And thank you again, everyone, for attending today's webinar. As mentioned at the start of the session, this webinar was recorded and a video will be sent to all attendees in the coming days. Before I sign off, just a quick reminder, Jimmie's already mentioned, but both Jimmie and the Vixio team will be at Money 2020 in Amsterdam next week. So if you are in the area, please drop by Vixio stand 1H264, where a member of the team will be happy to give you an on-the-spot demonstration of the Vixio product. If you wanted to schedule a meeting with anyone attending Money 2020, you can do so at vixio.com. And finally, if you have any questions about anything anything discussed in today's webinar or would like further information, please email info@vixio.com. Thank you.